I remember the moment he said it as though it happened only yesterday. It was a simple phrase, just a few words strung together, but it shattered everything. I wasn't prepared for it. I couldn't have been. We were sitting at the dinner table, the same table where we'd shared countless meals, but tonight felt different. Tonight, there was a distance between us. It wasn't physical. He was still sitting across from me, still wearing that smug smile I had once found endearing. No, the distance between us was emotional. It hung heavy in the air, thicker than the smoke from the candle in the middle of our dinner. The evening started off fine. We just returned from one of his business trips and I had made his favorite dinner, something I did without thinking because that's what I did. I took care of him. It was second nature. I loved making him feel like he was the center of my world. Tell me I was the perfect wife, that I did everything right, and I'd smile, believing it too. But tonight, it was as though he had other things on his mind. He'd been distant all evening, eyes scanning the room but never really seeing me. His phone buzzed on the table between us, and for the first time, I noticed how much attention he was giving it. Each ping seemed to pull him farther away, and I couldn't help but feel ignored. I tried not to let it get to me, but as the meal went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Finally, after the third buzz, he reached for his phone and unlocked it without a word. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen as he scrolled. I watched him, my chest tightening with every second that passed without him looking up at me. I was about to say something when he suddenly dropped the phone on the table with a force that made me jump. "Do you ever feel like you'll never be able to match my level?" he asked, not looking at me. I froze, the words hit me like a slap to the face and I couldn't catch my breath. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't a question I had ever expected from him. His tone was casual, but there was a coldness behind it, a sharpness that cut through the air. He wasn't asking for reassurance or even an answer. He was just throwing it out there like it was nothing. "Excuse me," I whispered, not sure if I had heard him correctly. He finally looked up, his eyes locking with mine, but they didn't hold the warmth they once did. They were cold, calculating. "I mean it. You know you'll never be able to keep up with the life I've built. You'll never match my status. No matter how hard you try." I wanted to laugh, it didn't make sense. It was so ridiculous that I almost believed I was hearing things, but I was. The words were out there and they hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I could feel my heart racing, my hands trembling beneath the table. I was a million miles away, trapped in a moment where all I could do was stare at him, trying to understand what had just happened. I stammered, but he cut me off. "It's not personal," he said, leaning back in his chair, as if this conversation were as casual as talking about the weather. "You've always known how much I've worked for everything I have. And you've always been comfortable. You've never had to prove yourself like I have." His words felt like nails being driven into my chest. The pain of his words, the insult of them, it was too much. I had never been one to argue, never been one to fight back when I was hurt. I had always believed in silence, in keeping the peace. But now, as I sat there, my face growing hotter with each passing second, I felt a shift. There was no peace in silence, no comfort in it. "I've worked just as hard as you," I managed to say, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. "I've supported you. I've built this life with you." He shrugged, unconcerned. "It's different, you can't compare, I'm in a different league. And you're just along for the ride." The words were sharp, like knives, but it wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the way he said them. The way he acted as though my contributions, my sacrifices meant nothing. I had spent years supporting him, building him up, doing everything in my power to make him feel like he was the most important person in the room. And now, in a single breath, he had reduced me to nothing. I sat there in stunned silence, feeling my whole world crumble. It was as though all the years I had spent with him meant nothing. All the love, the care, the attention I had given him, it was worthless. The reality of what he had said sunk in slowly, but it was deep and painful. His words had torn away the illusion I had been living under, and now I was left exposed, raw, and questioning everything I had ever believed about myself. He didn't apologize. He didn't even seem to notice how deeply his words had cut. He just picked up his phone again, as if nothing had happened, scrolling absent-mindedly through whatever had caught his attention. I wanted to scream, I wanted to throw something, but instead I sat there frozen. I felt small, insignificant. He had just told me in the most callous way possible that I would never be enough. And in that moment I believed him. I didn't just believe the words. What I believed was that I had spent so much time in his shadow that I didn't know who I was without it. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it wouldn't go away. The humiliation was unbearable. I wasn't sure if it was the words or the realization that I had let this happen for so long, that I had let myself shrink to fit into his world, and in the process, lost everything that made me me. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound of it was jarring in the silence that had fallen over us. I didn't say anything as I walked away from the table. I couldn't. The words he had said echoed in my mind, each one sharper than the last. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not anymore. I needed air. I needed space to think. But most of all, I needed to find a way to heal. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the words haunting me. "You'll never match my level." The words were cruel. They were designed to hurt, and they did. But in the silence of that room, something inside me stirred, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A small spark of defiance. I had been living my life for him, in his shadow, always playing second fiddle to his success. But what if I could step out of that shadow? What if, just maybe, I could show him, and myself, that I was capable of so much more than he'd ever given me credit for? That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to let his words define me. I wasn't going to let them control my future. The pain of his betrayal was deep, but it became the fuel I needed to change everything. I wasn't going to match his level. I was going to surpass it. I didn't cry that night. I couldn't. The tears were stuck somewhere deep inside me, heavy and bitter. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. The words echoed through my mind like a broken record. "You'll never match my level." I kept repeating them over and over, trying to make sense of the hurt, trying to understand what had gone wrong. I thought about the years I had spent with him, the dinners I'd prepared, the trips we'd taken, the late nights I had stayed up waiting for him to come home. I had worked so hard to build a life for us, for him, and this is what I got in return. His cruel dismissal, as if everything I had done meant nothing. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could he say something like that? How could someone I loved, someone I had given my heart to, treat me so dismissively? And it wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the way he said it, as if it were a simple fact, a truth that had always been obvious, as if he had always been better and I had always been less. But what hurt the most wasn't the insult itself. It was the realization that I had been living in his shadow for so long that I didn't even know how to live for myself anymore. I had given up so much of who I was just to keep him happy, just to keep our life moving forward. I had let his success define me, had let his world become mine. And now, he was telling me that I would never be enough. The days that followed felt like a blur. I moved through the motions of my life as if I were walking in a dream. I went to work, cooked dinner, did all the things I had always done, but inside I was crumbling. The more I saw him, the more I could feel the distance between us. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Every time he looked at me, there was a faint look of judgment in his eyes, as if he was silently reminding me that I would never match up to him. I could feel it even when we didn't talk about it. It was in the way he would go off on his business trips and leave me behind without a second thought, as though I was just an afterthought in his world. It was in the way he would speak about his colleagues and clients, as though they were the only people who truly mattered. It was in the way he never took my accomplishments seriously, never saw the hard work I put in, never acknowledged the sacrifices I had made. He had always been like this, in small ways, over the years. I had just never seen it before. Now, every word, every action, every little thing he did seemed to be a reminder of how small he made me feel, how insignificant I was in his world. The house felt different now, too. The walls, once filled with laughter and love, now felt cold and suffocating. I couldn't stand the silence that hung between us, the awkwardness that had settled like dust on everything we had once shared. I tried to talk to him, to bring up what he had said, but every time I opened my mouth, he dismissed me with a quick "you're overthinking it," or "I didn't mean it like that." As if it was nothing. As if I was nothing. I began to withdraw. I stopped going to the places we used to go, stopped talking to the friends we used to see together. I couldn't face them. How could I? What would I say? That my husband had told me I'd never match his level, and now I was just a shadow of who I used to be. No, I couldn't let them see me like that. I couldn't let anyone see how broken I was, how lost I felt. But deep down, something inside me was starting to stir. It was a small thing at first, just a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was there, waiting to be acknowledged. It wasn't anger, it was something else. Something stronger, something more powerful. One morning, I woke up early. The house was still quiet, the light of dawn just starting to creep through the curtains. I didn't want to lie there anymore, trapped in the feeling of being stuck. So I got up and walked into the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee, the steam rising from the mug. I sat there, staring out the window, and for the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep allowing his words to define me. I wasn't going to let him be the reason I lost myself. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't stay in this rut, couldn't stay in this place where I felt invisible. I had to take control of my own life. I had to find my own path. I started small. I began to focus on things that made me feel good, things I had forgotten about. I signed up for a painting class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I started walking in the mornings, getting outside to breathe fresh air, to clear my head. I reached out to old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, rekindling connections that had been lost in the years of my marriage. Slowly, little by little, I began to feel a shift inside me. But the most important thing I did was take a hard look at my career. I had always been a stay-at-home wife, supporting my husband while he built his empire. I had put my own ambitions aside for so long, thinking that my role was to help him achieve his dreams. But now, with the sting of his words still fresh, I realized that I had dreams of my own. I had skills, talents, and a passion I had ignored for too long. It was time to stop being passive. It was time to take action. I sat down at my desk one afternoon and started writing out a plan. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I began researching online, looking into different career paths, opportunities, and ways to build something for myself. I had no idea where this journey would take me, but I knew one thing: I was done being sidelined. I was done being the person who was always second to someone else. It was scary at first. The idea of stepping out of my comfort zone, of doing something completely different, felt overwhelming. But every time I thought about what he had said, every time I remembered his words, "You'll never match my level," I pushed myself harder. I wanted to prove him wrong, not for him, but for me. I wanted to show myself that I was capable of so much more than I had ever given myself credit for. I wasn't sure when the shift happened, when I stopped feeling so small and started feeling empowered, but it did. Slowly, the pieces started falling into place. I began to believe in myself again, in my abilities, in my worth. And most importantly, I began to see that the only person who could change my life was me. The days stretched on, and I continued to work on myself, one step at a time. I still didn't know exactly where I was headed, but I knew I was no longer living in the shadow of his expectations. I was carving my own path now, and it felt good. It felt right. One thing was clear: I would never allow myself to be defined by someone else's words again. I would never let anyone, not even the person I loved the most, make me feel less than I was. I was worthy of more. And I was going to prove it, not to him, but to myself. And so I started to build the life I had always dreamed of. One day at a time. One choice at a time. I didn't know how long it would take or where this journey would lead, but I was no longer afraid of the unknown. Because now I was the one in control. I'll never forget the exact moment it hit me, the realization that I couldn't live this way anymore. It wasn't some grand epiphany, no flashing lights or dramatic music. It was just one quiet morning, like any other, but in that stillness, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, staring at the same walls I had seen for years. The house felt cold, even though the sun was just beginning to rise. I didn't know what had happened to the warmth, but it had disappeared somewhere along the way. As I sat there, I found myself staring at the kitchen window. The world outside was starting to wake up: the birds, the trees swaying gently, the soft light of dawn. It was beautiful. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something inside me, a spark maybe. The feeling was faint at first, but it was there. It was the smallest thing, but it made me pause. I realized that I had been so focused on the past, on everything that had gone wrong, that I had forgotten to look at the future. I had forgotten to look at what I could do. Not what my husband could do for me, not what my life had been, but what I could do for myself. I couldn't keep living like this, wallowing in anger and resentment. Yes, his words had cut me deeply, but they didn't define me. I realized that I had been letting his cruelty control my every thought, my every move. And in that moment, I understood something that made my chest tighten with excitement. I was still here. I was still breathing. I was still capable of change. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Real hope. Not the kind of hope you feel when you're waiting for someone else to fix things for you, but the kind that comes from deep inside, from the belief that you have the power to rewrite your own story. I put my coffee cup down, my hands suddenly steady, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let my life be defined by him anymore. I wasn't going to let him, or anyone, tell me that I would never amount to anything. I was done with feeling small, done with hiding in the background of my own life. I was going to take control. I was going to build something for myself. It wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't something I could change overnight. But it was the first step, and that was enough. The first thing I did was start small. I couldn't just snap my fingers and become someone different, but I could take little actions, one after another. I had spent years as a stay-at-home wife, always putting my needs aside for him, for the life we were building. But now I was putting myself first. It felt strange at first, almost selfish, but in a way it was a relief. I had spent so long making sure everything was perfect for him, so long pretending to be the perfect wife, that I had forgotten about the dreams I had put on hold. Now, it was time to dust those dreams off and make them real. The first step was getting back to who I was before I became so consumed by our life. I had always loved painting, but I had let it slip away when life became busy, when I started to put my focus on him and our home. I found a small art class in the neighborhood, and even though it felt intimidating, I signed up. I had no idea if I would be good at it, or if I would even enjoy it anymore, but I had to try. I had to do something for me. The first class was awkward. I felt out of place, like I didn't belong there. I was the oldest one in the room, surrounded by young women who were so sure of themselves. But as I picked up my paintbrush and began working on my canvas, something inside me clicked. The world around me faded. It was just me and the colors, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It was as though the noise of everything that had happened in the past year, the hurt, the betrayal, the anger, was being washed away with each stroke of the brush. I didn't care if I was good at it. What mattered was that I was doing something that was mine. That night, I sat up late, finishing the painting I had started in class. I wasn't sure what it was supposed to be, but I felt something shift inside me as I worked. I wasn't just painting on a canvas. I was painting a new version of myself. I was reclaiming a part of me that had been buried for too long. The next thing I did was look at my career. For years, I had put my ambitions on hold to support him. I had convinced myself that his success was my success, that his dreams were my dreams. But I had my own dreams. I had my own talents. And now it was time to explore them. I had always been interested in writing, but I had never taken it seriously. Every time I thought about it, I pushed the idea away, telling myself it was a silly dream. But now I was different. I was tired of letting fear stop me from doing what I wanted. So I started writing short stories, blog posts, anything that came to mind. At first, it felt unnatural. The words didn't flow easily, and I doubted myself every step of the way. But with every sentence, I grew a little more confident. I started submitting my work to small magazines and websites, never expecting to hear back. But slowly, things began to happen. A few of my articles were accepted. Then, a short story I had written was published online. It was small, insignificant to the outside world, but to me, it was everything. It was proof that I was capable of more than I had ever believed. It was proof that I could succeed on my own. I kept going. I kept pushing myself to do more, to write more, to put myself out there more. And little by little, I began to build a small but growing following. People started to notice my work. Editors reached out to me for projects. I was carving out a space for myself, one that didn't involve my husband, one that didn't involve anyone else but me. The best part, I was starting to enjoy my life again. I was starting to enjoy myself again. There were times, of course, when doubt crept in. When I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I was crazy to think that I could truly change my life. But every time those thoughts came, I remembered what my husband had said. "You'll never match my level." And I realized he was wrong. He didn't know me. He didn't know the strength I had inside me, the fire that had been smoldering for years. He didn't know that I could rise up. even after everything he had done to try to keep me down. That became my fuel. Every time I felt weak, every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself that I had something he would never have: my own sense of purpose, my own goals, my own future. The months passed, and things began to change. I was no longer the woman who sat quietly in the background, waiting for my husband's approval. I was no longer the woman who let someone else's dreams define me. I had become the woman who was unapologetically chasing her own dreams. And the more I did that, the stronger I felt. I started making more money from my writing. I started receiving offers from publishing houses and agencies. I began to travel for work, something I had never done before. I was building a life that was mine and mine alone. It wasn't the luxurious, high-status life my husband had, but it was better, because it was mine. There were still moments of doubt. There were still days when I missed the life we had shared, when I missed the idea of being with someone who loved me. But those moments became fewer and farther between, because I was no longer looking for love or approval from someone else. I had found something better. I had found love and approval from myself. The day I realized just how far I had come was a quiet moment. I had just finished an article, and I sat back in my chair, reading it over once more. It was everything I had hoped for: smart, engaging, and completely my voice. I smiled, not just because of the article, but because of what it represented. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had taken my life back. I had awakened to the woman I had always been inside, waiting to be freed. And now no one, especially not him, could ever take that from me. The first few weeks after I made that decision, after I finally took control, were some of the hardest of my life. The change didn't come easy. It wasn't a magic switch where everything suddenly felt right. There were days when I wanted to quit, days when doubt crept in like a shadow, reminding me of all the reasons I should stay in the safety of my old life. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. I couldn't go back to that version of myself, the one who quietly stood in the background of someone else's life, wondering where I fit in. I had to keep moving forward, even when it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere at all. It felt like climbing a mountain with no end in sight. Each step I took felt like a battle. Sometimes I didn't even know if I had the strength to keep going. There were moments when I stared at my computer screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, unsure of what to write. Other times, I would spend hours working on a project only to get one rejection email after another. My heart would sink with each new failure, and I'd feel the weight of it all pressed down on me. Was this all worth it? Should I just give up and go back to what I knew? But then, I would remember what my husband had said to me: "You'll never match my level." That thought made me push harder, even when everything seemed impossible. It wasn't just about proving him wrong. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about me, about proving to myself that I could do this, that I was capable of more than I had ever believed. Every time I felt like giving up, I told myself, "You are not the person he thinks you are more." One of the hardest parts of this journey was the loneliness. I had always been surrounded by people, friends, family, his business associates. But suddenly, it felt like I was alone. When I stopped focusing all my energy on being the perfect wife, when I stopped supporting him in the way I had for so long, the people around me seemed to fade away. It wasn't intentional, but I could see it happening. His friends, who I'd once considered my friends too, no longer invited me to gatherings or events. I could tell they were uncomfortable around me, as if my new path was too much of a threat to the life they had known. I didn't have his status to keep me in their good graces anymore, so I became invisible. At first, it bothered me. I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But then, as time passed, I realized something important. I was learning to be okay with being alone. I was learning that I didn't need the approval of other people to feel good about myself. That was a lesson I had never truly understood until then. And so, in the quiet moments, when I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table or staring out the window, I began to fill that silence with something else. I filled it with the sound of my own thoughts, my own hopes, my own dreams. And slowly, I began to trust myself again. I began to believe that I was enough, even without the constant validation of others. As I kept working, my confidence grew, and with it, my skills. I wasn't just writing anymore, I was creating. I started submitting more of my work to bigger publications, not expecting much but knowing I had to try. Rejection still stung, but it didn't hurt as much. With each no, I became more determined to hear a yes. I wasn't afraid of failure anymore. I was embracing it as part of the process. Then it happened. It was a random Tuesday afternoon when I received an email from a well-known online magazine. They wanted to publish one of my articles, not just as a guest post, but as a feature piece. They had read one of my recent blog posts, and they wanted me to write a longer piece for their readers. I stared at the screen for a moment, unable to believe what I was seeing. I had spent so long feeling invisible, unsure of my place, and now here it was, my first real break. I felt the excitement bubble up inside me, but at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a little scared. What if I wasn't good enough? What if I couldn't deliver? But then I remembered everything I had been through. The pain, the hurt, the loneliness. It all led me here. This was my moment. I couldn't let fear stop me now. I accepted the offer. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of late nights and long hours, but I didn't mind. I loved it. I loved every second of it. The article came together in ways I never expected. I was proud of it, proud of myself. When I sent it off, I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that no matter the outcome, I had created something meaningful. A few days later, the piece was published. I remember clicking on the link, seeing my name at the top of the article, and feeling a rush of pride. This wasn't just a small blog anymore. This was real. People were reading my work. They were paying attention. It wasn't a huge audience yet, but it was a start. And it was my start. I kept writing, kept submitting. Soon, I found myself getting offers from other sites and publications. It was slow at first, but it was building. My name was starting to get recognition, and the more I worked, the more confident I became in my abilities. I could feel it happening. I was building a career, a real one. In the meantime, I kept up with my painting. It became more than just a hobby. It became a way for me to express the emotions I couldn't put into words. The more I painted, the more I felt like I was reconnecting with the person I used to be, the person I had forgotten about for so long. I started sharing my paintings online, just like I had my writing. And to my surprise, people started responding. It wasn't long before I received a message from a small art gallery. They were hosting an exhibition of local artists, and they wanted to feature some of my work. At that moment, I realized that I was doing something I never thought was possible. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was creating the life I wanted, one brushstroke, one sentence, one small victory at a time. But it wasn't just about the small successes. It was the feeling that came with it, the feeling of finally standing on my own 2 feet. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking to someone else to tell me I was worthy. I wasn't waiting for anyone to give me permission to be proud of what I was building. Every step I took was a reminder that I was capable, that I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel successful. Every time I looked back on how far I had come, it pushed me further. I could see the progress. I could feel the change within myself. And even when things didn't go as planned, I knew that I was heading in the right direction. As time went on, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd reach. I wasn't just living in the shadows anymore. I was creating my own light. I wasn't just building a career, I was building a future that was entirely mine, and it felt incredible. But there was still something missing. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it just beyond my reach. It was the feeling of peace. The feeling that came when I knew, without a doubt, that I had taken control of my life and made it something worth living. And that was enough. It was more than enough. The climb wasn't over yet. I still had far to go, still had mountains to conquer. But for the first time, I wasn't climbing alone. I had myself now, and that was all I needed. I wasn't going to stop. Not now, not ever. It's funny how life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. For months, I had been pushing myself to the limit, battling the ghosts of my past and trying to build a future for myself, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. And then, just when I thought things were finally falling into place, the universe threw me another challenge. A big one. It started with an email. A simple email, but one that would change everything. It was from a publishing house. The subject line read, "We loved your pitch." I stared at the words, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even remember sending a pitch to anyone recently. My mind raced. Had I somehow forgotten something I'd sent out months ago, or was this just another one of those spam emails trying to sell me something? but as I opened the message, the reality of it hit me. They had read one of my recent articles. They wanted to offer me a book deal. I blinked, rereading the message. It felt like I was in a dream, like someone had slipped me into an alternate reality where things like this actually happen to people like me. But it wasn't a dream, it was real. I remember sitting there for a long time, staring at the email, feeling my heart race. My hands trembled. I wanted to shout. I wanted to cry. I wanted to pick up the phone and call someone, anyone, to share this moment. But instead, I sat in silence. I took a deep breath and read the email again. And again. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the breakthrough I had been working for. A book deal's me. It didn't feel real, but it was happening. I could feel the weight of it settle in, slowly at first, and then all at once. I thought back to all the nights I had spent doubting myself, wondering if I was wasting my time. To the rejections, the fears, the insecurities, all of those moments that had almost stopped me from going after my dreams. And now, here I was. The tears came then, quiet ones at first. Tears of relief, of joy, of disbelief. I had fought so hard to get here, and I had finally made it. It wasn't the glamorous life I had imagined all those years ago. It wasn't about luxury or fame. It was something better. It was mine. The next few weeks were a blur. I signed the contract, and suddenly I was thrust into a whirlwind of meetings, deadlines, and excitement. I was writing every day, sometimes for hours at a time, pouring my heart into the book. It was everything I had dreamed of. It felt like I had found my purpose. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something that felt right, something that had my name written all over it. There were times when it felt overwhelming, when I thought maybe I wasn't ready for all of this. But then I'd remember where I had started, from that place of uncertainty and pain, and I'd push through. I wasn't going to stop. Not now. It wasn't just the book deal that changed my life. It was everything that came with it. The recognition, the validation, the feeling that people actually cared about what I had to say. It was like the world was finally paying attention to me, not as someone's wife, not as someone in the background, but as me, just me. I began to get messages from people who had read my articles, people who told me my words had resonated with them. They shared their stories with me, their struggles, their dreams. I had started this journey not just to prove something to myself, but to prove something to others as well, that it was possible to start over, to build something new, no matter how old you were, no matter how far you had fallen. And it was working. I was doing it. One of the first big milestones came when the publishing house offered to send me on a book tour. A tour. I could hardly believe it. Me, traveling, meeting readers, signing books. It felt surreal. It felt big. I wasn't just writing anymore. I was stepping into the world I had always dreamed of, one I had convinced myself was never meant for someone like me. The tour itself was nothing like I had expected. There was no red carpet, no massive crowds. Instead, it was small events, intimate settings where I could connect with people, talk about my book, and hear their thoughts. There was something so special about it. It wasn't about the glitz and glamour. It was about the stories, the connections. It was about real people, and it was incredible. Every time I stood in front of an audience, talking about my journey, I felt like I was telling my story for the first time. Not the story of a woman who was always in the background, who faded into the shadows of someone else's life. No, this was my story now. It was the story of a woman who had fought her way to the top, who had clawed her way out of the dark and into the light. It was the story of me, and I was finally sharing it. But the moment that truly shook me, that made me realize how far I had come, was the first time I saw the book in a store. I had been to the bookstore several times in my life, but this time was different. This time, I wasn't just browsing. This time, I was looking for my own name. When I walked into the store and saw my book sitting there on the shelf, I couldn't breathe. It was like the air was thick around me, like everything had paused for just a moment. I stood there, staring at it, completely frozen. I hadn't even realized how much this moment meant to me until I was standing there, looking at the book with my name on it. All of the struggles, all of the rejections, the doubts, the loneliness, all of it had led me to this point. It was a moment I couldn't have imagined when I was sitting at home, unsure of who I was or what I wanted. And now here it was, proof that I had made it, proof that I was more than just someone's wife. I was an author. I was someone who had built a life from the ground up. The next few days were a blur of emotions. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and even strangers congratulating me. People were buying my book, sharing it on social media, telling me they had been inspired by my story. And as much as I appreciated all the love and attention, it was the personal messages that meant the most to me. The ones from women who had been in the same position I had been in, stuck in the background, unsure of who they were or what they could accomplish. One message, in particular, stood out. It was from a woman who told me that she had been in an emotionally abusive marriage for years, and reading my book had inspired her to leave. She said that if I could do it, so could she. That message brought me to tears. It wasn't about the book deal. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about making a difference, about showing others that they too could break free, that they could rise above their circumstances. That's when I realized that all of this, everything I had worked for, wasn't just for me. It was for anyone who needed to see that it was possible to change, to grow, to become something more than they thought they could be. Looking back on it now, I can hardly recognize the woman I was when I first started this journey. She felt like someone else, a person trapped in a life she didn't want. I've learned so much since then. I've learned that no matter how lost you feel, there's always a way forward. There's always a way to build something new. And maybe it's not going to be easy. Maybe it's not going to happen overnight. But it will happen if you don't give up. I'm not the same person I was before. I don't just have a book deal. I have a life that's mine, that I built with my own two hands. And that's worth more than anything I could have ever imagined. I never needed to prove myself to anyone. Not to my husband, not to anyone. I did it for me. I did it to show myself that I was capable of more. And now I'm living a life I could never have dreamed of. A life that's mine. It's funny how the universe works sometimes. You think you've moved on, left the past behind, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, it comes crashing back into your life when you least expect it. That's exactly what happened when I ran into him again. It had been over a year since I had left. A year since I had made the decision to stop living in the shadows of someone else's expectations, to stop letting his words define who I was. I had built a life for myself, one I was proud of. I wasn't the same person I was when I had been with him. I was stronger, more confident, more alive. And I had the proof in my hand. A book, a career, a sense of independence that was mine and mine alone. I was at a book signing event at a small local bookstore. I had been traveling for a while, meeting readers, talking about my book, and soaking in the excitement of the journey I had started. This was supposed to be just another event, another stop on the tour, but it turned out to be something I never expected. I had just finished signing a book for a young woman when I heard a voice behind me. It was familiar, too familiar. I turned around, half expecting to see someone I knew from my new life, someone who had become part of this exciting new chapter. But there, standing in the doorway of the bookstore, was him. I froze, my heart skipped a beat. For a moment I felt like I was back in time, trapped in a memory I had tried so hard to forget. His face hadn't changed much. The sharp jawline, the confident posture, it was all the same. But there was something different about him now. The arrogance that once seemed so natural to him was gone. Instead, he looked small, vulnerable even. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I should say anything at all. It had been over a year after all. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, and I had worked so hard to get to where I was. I wasn't the same woman who had been humiliated by his words, who had felt lost and worthless. I wasn't that person anymore. But there he was, the man who had once told me I would never match his level. The man who had made me feel like I was nothing. And suddenly, I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, confusion, and surprisingly, a bit of pity. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, staring at me, his eyes tracing the lines of my face as if trying to see if the woman before him was the same one he had known. He took a step forward, his hands in his pockets, and I felt a twinge of discomfort. What did he want? What was he doing here? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Wow," he said, his voice almost too soft to hear. "I never thought I'd see you again." I stared at him, not sure how to respond. There was a part of me that wanted to turn and walk away, to act like I didn't care. But there was another part of me, the stronger part, the part that had fought so hard to get here, that wanted to face him head-on, to show him just how far I had come. "Neither did I said, my voice steady, but there was an edge to it. I wasn't sure if I was more surprised or annoyed by his sudden appearance. He gave a small, self-conscious smile. "I saw the event online," he said, gesturing toward the table where I had been signing books. I didn't know you were doing all this. I raised an eyebrow, trying to hide the hurt that threatened to rise up. Well, things change, I said, forcing myself to smile. I'm not the same person I was when we were together. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking toward the ground for a moment before meeting mine again. I didn't think you would be, he said quietly. I guess I always thought you'd just fade away, like everything else in my life. His words hit me harder than I expected. He had always believed that I was nothing without him, that I would never amount to anything. And for a long time, I believed it too. But now, hearing him say it again, I realized how much he had underestimated me. I didn't fade away, I said, my voice stronger now. I built something for myself. His expression flickered surprise, regret, maybe even a hint of shame, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I never meant to hurt you, he said, the words seeming rehearsed. I was just, he paused, running a hand through his hair. I was just caught up in my own world. I thought I was helping you by pushing you to be more like me. I could feel my heart harden as I listened to him. It was the same old story, the same excuses, the same self-justifications. He still didn't get it. He still didn't understand that it wasn't about being like him. It was about being me. But I couldn't be angry anymore. I had moved on, and I wasn't going to let him drag me back into the past. I didn't need to be like you, I said, my voice firm now. I needed to be myself, and that's exactly what I've done. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words settle in. And honestly, I'm glad things turned out the way they did, because I'm living a life now that's mine. I don't need anyone to validate me. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the realization slowly dawning on him. I wasn't the woman he had left behind. I wasn't the woman who had clung to his every word, waiting for him to tell me who I was. I had found my own path, and that was something he would never understand. I'm proud of you, he said, almost hesitantly. I never thought you'd be able to do it, to make something of yourself. I could have smiled, could have accepted his apology, but I didn't. I had already forgiven him long ago, not for him, but for me. I wasn't going to let his approval or his regret define me anymore. Thank you, I said, my voice softening, but only slightly. But I didn't do this for you. I did it for me. I did it to prove to myself that I was more than what you thought I was. He stood there, silent for a moment, as if taking in my words. I could see the wheels turning in his head, but I knew he would never truly understand. He couldn't. Well, he said finally, breaking the silence, I guess I'll leave you to it. I didn't expect to see you like this, but I'm glad you're happy. Really. Thanks, I said, nodding. I'm happy. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And just like that, he was gone. I stood there for a moment, my heart still racing. I wasn't sure what I felt after that encounter. Part of me was surprised that he had actually acknowledged how far I had come, surprised by the small amount of remorse I saw in his eyes. But another part of me felt nothing. And that was okay. I had spent so much of my life waiting for someone else to recognize my worth, to tell me that I mattered. But now, I knew that I didn't need anyone's approval but my own. I looked around the bookstore, at the readers who had gathered to hear me speak, at the stack of books I had written. And for the first time, I realized that I had come full circle. I had walked away from a life that had once defined me, and now I had built something entirely my own. The past was just that, the past. It didn't define me anymore. I was living my life now, and that was all that mattered. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was looking forward. And nothing, not even him, could change that. I sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping on a cup of tea, staring at the city below. The skyline glowed softly in the fading light of the evening, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. Life felt peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I had everything I needed right here. The view was beautiful, but it wasn't the only thing that took my breath away. I was sitting in a life I had built for myself, alone but strong, and for the first time in a long time truly content. It had been a year since I had stepped away from everything, since I made the decision to take control of my own destiny. And now, as I sat here, looking out over the city, I could finally see just how far I had come. I had a career, a life. My book was still doing well, and it had opened doors I never thought possible. I was no longer just the wife in the background. I wasn't defined by someone else's success. I had my own, and it was mine. The emails, the messages from readers, the invitations to speak at conferences, it was all still overwhelming at times, but it was also exhilarating. I was being heard. People wanted to hear what I had to say. And more than that, they cared about my story, my voice. And yet there was something else, something deeper. Something I couldn't quite put into words, but I knew was there. It wasn't just about the book deals or the recognition. It wasn't about the validation from others. It was about the quiet, powerful feeling of standing in my own truth, of knowing, without a doubt, that I was enough. But none of this would have happened if I hadn't made the decision to leave everything behind. If I hadn't chosen to walk away from the man who once told me I'd never match his level. The words he had spoken to me that day, that brutal, cutting remark, had been the catalyst for everything that came after. "You'll never match my level." I still remember those words clearly, like a slap to the face. They had haunted me for so long, eating away at my confidence, my sense of worth. But now, as I sat on the balcony, I realized just how far I had come, how much I had surpassed that level, his level, or anyone else. I had built something better, something I was proud of. It wasn't just about success in the traditional sense. It was about freedom. The freedom to be who I wanted to be, to live life on my own terms, to make decisions that were mine and mine alone. And that was something I could never have had in the life I left behind. I thought about how different things had been back then, how I had felt so small, so invisible in the shadow of his world, how every achievement he had made had felt like a reminder of everything I was. I had believed his words, believed that I wasn't enough, that I would never be anything more than his wife, that my worth was tied to his success. But the truth was, I didn't need him, or anyone else, to make me feel valid. I had proven that to myself. The phone buzzed on the table next to me, pulling me from my thoughts. I picked it up, half expecting another message about work or a fan reaching out. But instead, it was a message from my best friend Lily. "Dinner tonight, I miss my favorite author." I smiled, my heart swelling a little. It had been a while since we had gotten together. Since everything had taken off, I had been so focused on my career, on keeping everything moving forward, that I hadn't made as much time for the people who had supported me from the beginning. I quickly typed a response. "Dinner sounds perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. I put the phone down and looked out at the city again. It was funny how quickly everything had changed. A year ago, I had been in a completely different place, physically, emotionally, mentally. I was living in a world I no longer recognized, weighed down by a man's opinion of me, by the idea that I had to be something I wasn't in order to be loved and accepted. But now, the person I had become was someone I could finally respect. I wasn't living for anyone else anymore. I wasn't chasing validation from a man or a crowd or even the world. I was living for me. I was enough just as I was. Dinner with Lily was exactly what I needed. We laughed, shared stories, and caught up on everything that had happened over the last year. She was proud of me, so proud of everything I had accomplished. And yet, she never once acted surprised. Lily had always believed in me. She had never doubted that I was capable of doing something great. She had been my cheerleader, my support system, long before anyone else. "So," she said, after we had finished dessert, "I saw that you're being featured in the literary review next month. That's huge." I laughed, shaking my head. "I can't believe it, it still doesn't feel real." "Well, it's real, you've worked hard for it, you deserve every bit of it." Her words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I had spent so much time doubting myself, questioning whether I was truly worthy of all this success. But in this moment, sitting across from my best friend, I realized something. I had earned every part of this. Every rejection, every tear, every struggle had led me here, to this table, to this life. "I'm proud of you," Lily said, her voice sincere. "I've always known you had it in you, but it's not just about the success. You're a different person now, you're yourself again." Her words struck a chord deep within me. It was true. I had spent so long lost in someone else's version of who I should be that I had forgotten who I was. But now, I was finally me. I had found the person I was meant to be, and that felt better than anything else. As I walked back to my car that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't just walking away from dinner with my best friend, I was walking away from the past. From the person I used to be, from the person I had been forced to pretend to be. I had made my own way. I had fought for the life I wanted, and I had achieved something incredible. The next few months were a blur of continued success: more books, more speaking engagements, more opportunities. But even as my career took off, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't just building a career. I was building a life. A life that was mine, that was built on my terms, by my hands, and fueled by my heart. As I stood on the balcony again, looking out at the city, I realized that the life I had now was everything I had ever wanted. It was everything I had worked for. And most importantly, it was mine. I smiled to myself as I thought about how far I had come, how much I had overcome. There was nothing that could stop me now. He had said I'd never match his status. But what he didn't know was that I had surpassed it. And in doing so, I had found something far more valuable than any level of success: myself. I wasn't just living anymore, I was thriving, and that was enough.